So we're on lesson 11, talking about Mark chapter 14. Like I said, it's 72 verses, so we're, as we've been doing, just hitting some of the high points, discussing the questions that we're going through. So hopefully everybody had a chance to read through the chapter during the week to get some familiarity with it. So as we're going through, we'll see some of the goals that we've been talking about. Talk more about Mark continuing to show that Jesus was not only the Christ but also the Son of God. So we'll see later on in the study this week how that's ultimately kind of turned against Jesus as well. And so the Jewish leadership using that, and then also the continuing to see how the gospel message, we can see that in the study of Mark. So jumping into the first question here at the start, so in verses 1 and 2, what is the reason that the chief priests and scribes are not willing to kill Jesus now? And what does that tell us about the religious leaders? So as we're remembering back, so last week was a little bit different in Mark, if we remember. So chapter 13 was, most of what we talked about was Jesus' prophecy regarding the destruction of Jerusalem. And like what we even talked about last week, Mark doesn't usually go into he hasn't been going into long teachings of Jesus. It's usually a little bit more brief, but chapter 13 was kind of plugged in there. So we talked about that. So if you think back at chapter 12 and forward, everything else we've talked about, all the persecution, all the resistance that the leadership had been giving towards Jesus. But now a couple weeks ago, we started talking about the triumphal entry. So Jesus is in Jerusalem for the Passover week. And so now things are really starting to sort of intensify. So sorry to derail everybody on answer to number one, but just some background of where we're at to catch us up. So we're back again now talking about the kind of the resistance from the Jewish leadership. Josh?
Well, and since it was happening at the time of the Passover, you're going to have the large majority of the Jews from all over the Roman Empire coming into the city, and because of the popularity of Jesus, the triumphal entry happening, people calling him the Son of David, and thinking the kingdom was going to come right then. That's why it says that they're wanting to take him by stealth in verse 1 to kill him, because they're worried a riot's going to break out.
Yeah.
Because he's in the temple every day teaching the people, and if they were to grab him then and there, they'd have a lot of problems dealing with the crowd.
Yeah. Yeah, so even going back, I think it's a couple chapters when Jesus asks, when they ask him by what authority they're teaching, and he asks them a question about John the Baptist. That's one of the reasons that they give there too, is that they were afraid of how the people would respond since they held John as a prophet. So even at that time, they were kind of afraid of crowd control or trying to figure that out. But now it's Passover week. Now there's even more people, which we see as we get into Acts of the day of Pentecost. We see all these people, that there's extra people in Jerusalem this time of year. So it's the kind of the continued crowd control, but then it's kind of amped up even more with it being Passover week. Maybe more people spending time in the temple that wouldn't normally be there, hearing Jesus, that type of thing. Robbie?
I was going to say, it just seems like they care more about their own relevancy than anything.
Yeah.
Preserving themselves.
Yeah, so that gets into the second question, right, about what does it tell them? Yeah, so they're all about power preservation at this point, of just calculating to see what they can retain. They've tried, as we've seen throughout Mark, tried to refute Jesus in a number of ways, all kinds of different things, just kind of seeing what would stick, and they can't really make anything stick. They can't make him any less popular, any of these things. So they're trying to take him by stealth, like Josh said, so trying to keep the people, they're afraid of upsetting the people, so like I said, just trying to do kind of crowd control. And I think it's just the other thing that we learn about them is that they're still not interested in who Jesus is, right? That they're still refusing. They've seen all the teaching, they've heard him teaching in the temple, just like everybody else. But to Robbie's point, they're kind of blinded by what they might lose in their physical power on the earth, right? So we're continuing to see that. We're not really seeing any change in their approach. And then obviously at the end of the chapter, we'll see where that leads them. But ultimately, at this point, they got there a few chapters ago, but they're looking to kill him. It says that in verse 1. And so they've gone all the way from just not believing him, believing he's a false teacher, to we just need to kill Jesus. All right, so getting into the second question, so what is different between the attitude of the woman and the attitude of the disciples? So this is starting in verse 3, going through verse 9 of Jesus being anointed in Bethany. So difference between the attitude between the woman and the disciples. So we'll read that, read at least a little portion of that, starting in verse 3. It says, "And while he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at table, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly, and she broke the flask and poured it over his head. There were some who said to themselves indignantly, 'Why was the ointment wasted like that? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor,' and they scolded her." And then we see Jesus' response in verse 6 to that he basically commended what the woman had done, anointing him before his burial, and that she would be known forever for what she had done. So what's the difference between the attitude of the woman and the disciples that we see here? And feel free to lace in the other parts of the question if you want to. There.
I feel like this is, we oftentimes want to judge people for not doing something exactly how we think they should do it, but her heart was in the right place.
Yeah.
So not that there would have been anything wrong with selling it and giving that money to the poor,
Yep.
if that was what she felt she needed to do, but her heart was in the right place with what she was doing, and they were judging her for it, and what she was doing wasn't wrong.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There would have been nothing wrong with selling it and giving it to the poor. Yeah.
I think she realized more so maybe how special it was that Jesus was there with them versus the apostles who had, Jesus had been there with them at this point for nearly 3 years, and
Yep.
they just kind of gotten used to it, and she was like, the Savior's here. Like, it's a
Yeah.
good thing.
Yeah, so the thing that stood out to me and what we've been seeing also in the focus of Jesus is continuing going back to spiritual things, right? That he's always redirecting from the physical to the spiritual. And this seems like another instance. Where are the disciples? Where's their head at in this? Very physical, right? They're saying, even if it is doing a good thing, like giving the money to the poor, which is fine, it's a fine thing to do, but it's all very physical of, well, don't waste this on just anointing Jesus, not realizing really what she's doing and where Jesus is at in his life, how close he is to his death, as he references that she's anointed his body before his burial. So Jesus knows. But yeah, the woman, was she focused on physical things? Apparently not, because this is probably her. It was no small sum of money. I think the denarii is one day's wage, and so it's you're talking about nearly a year's worth of work that gone just like that, right? They long to anoint someone with oil, like it's gone. There's no putting that back in the flask. And so was she worried about physical things, or no? She was focused on Jesus, like Josh said, in the moment.
Well, it also proves that she was all in, because Mark
Yeah.
tells the detail that she broke the flask. So sometimes these flasks were sealed
Yeah.
legally, and once you break it, it's there. You have to use it, and you can't go and sell what's left over or whatever because
Yeah.
it's already been broken up.
Yeah, no, that's a good. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I didn't think about that, but yeah, breaking the flask, it's all out. Yeah, yep, that's a good point. So then the second part of the question is reading the account in John 12 that gives us a little bit more information about the exact exchange about the selling it to the poor. So did anybody read that? Know what the references there in John. Come on.
It's a contrast to the heart of Judas, who's kind of shows how people think in general with ill intentions. They will mask them with
Yeah.
something good.
Yeah.
And so he's trying to mask his ill intentions with something that is good, like giving to the poor. But I think that kind of speaks to how a lot of us behave.
Yeah.
You know, we will mask things over, you know, with a general good thing, right?
Yeah.
Where our hearts are, you know, it can be deceiving.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the definition of hypocrisy, right? That's putting on that act to make it seem like you're. And so what do we know? What do we learn from John? What's Judas also doing with what's his role, and what's he doing taking advantage of his role for the group? Yeah, so he's the money keeper, so he's the guy with the money, and we are told in John that he's taking some of that as well. So I mean, he could have all the intention to give 100 denarii to the poor, right? But who knows what's going to happen to the other 200 denarii? And so we see that that Judas was a thief. But going back to the Mark account, I do think it's interesting. So it does say in verse 4, there were some who said to themselves. So that would make me think that there's multiple of them as well, right? So whether they were wanting to do it for dishonest gain or not, there's at least multiple disciples, that maybe were thinking the same thing of like, oh man, like that seems like a total waste of that valuable oil. And then at the end of verse 5, it says, and they scolded her. So there was multiple disciples involved that had, at least in some way, maybe not the exact same mindset as Judas did that we're told in John, but Mark makes it clear that it's not just Judas, that there's others there that are thinking the same thing. And so, again, we'll get into later. We'll see continued focus on the physical, but I think that seems to be Mark's point here. And so, then moving into the next little section about Judas, so building out of this and his thought about selling this, but then also we learned from John. So the last part of the question, how does this fit with verses 10 through 11 of Mark 14? So how does that, what we learned about Judas in Mark or in this exchange, how does that fit in with what we see Judas do apparently soon after this? So he goes to sell out Jesus, right? To the leaders. So in verse 10 it says, then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money, and he sought an opportunity to betray him. So again, what's Judas's focus? On the physical. He's not worried about, he doesn't seem to have any commitment to Jesus, doesn't have a price, that he's seen the pressure build probably, just like everybody else, the intensity of the pressure that the Jewish leaders are putting on Jesus. And at this point, he seems to be calculating which side is he going to be on, right? Just like anybody else would do, right? That we see the other disciples. We're about to talk about what side Peter thought he was going to be on, right? And so he was willing to go. He kind of preemptively went to the Jewish leaders just to kind of see what would they do, and they offered him money, and he took their offer to betray Jesus for what ultimately was a small amount of money, right? We're told it's 30 pieces of silver, which is not a lot of money. But for us, do we betray Jesus sometimes for small physical gains? Yeah, so if you think about things you've done in your lives, how many times have we betrayed Jesus, betrayed what he wants us to do for some meaningless, maybe there's no physical gain at all, or fleeting physical gain. And so as hard as we can be on Judas for doing that, we do that ourselves in our lives, right? But that's something that we struggle with, losing focus on the spiritual to be focused on these small physical things like Judas was, like betraying Jesus for a small sum of money. All right, so moving to question 3, what parallels can we draw between the Passover feast and the Lord's Supper? And does this help us understand what God is doing through Jesus at this time? So, can we get some people to start listing out what are some of the parallels between Passover and the Lord's Supper?
Well, they had to kill a Passover lamb.
Okay, yep.
For everybody to eat.
Okay, what was the characteristics of the lamb?
Pure, unblemished.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yep. Okay. What were they saved by from the lamb? They just had to kill it, or what? Yeah. Where? Yeah. Yeah. So they had specific instructions that's what saved them, right? It wasn't following all. That was when the last plague came over. That it was the blood on the doorpost, right? That was not says it didn't have to obey everything else, but that was ultimately the sign, right? Was the blood? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So what else? What else in the Lord's Supper do we see that's carried over from the Passover? What's Thomas?
Unleavened bread.
Yep, unleavened bread. Okay. Yeah. So we're told so Exodus 12 gives a lot of the description on the Passover instructions. So they were supposed to remove all the leaven out. And so the unleavened bread is what they ate. Robbie, did you have something else?
Are they both memorials?
Yeah. Yep. So that was one of the things I had. So Exodus 12, starting in verse 25, it says, when you come to the land that the Lord will give you, as he has promised, you shall keep this service. And when your children say to you, what do you mean by this service? You shall say, it is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, for he passed over the houses of the people of Israel in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians, but spared our houses. So yeah, so it's a memorial. So no different. You could fit in almost exactly that same quote to what we're told to do each week in the Lord's Supper, right? And so what do we, have we ever had children ask us, what do you mean by this service, right? Isn't that what every kid asks? Like, what's going on? Why do we do this? Or why do we do this every week? Or why can't I do it? Or those things. So it's a memorial that they're supposed to use to remind and to teach. The other thing that I noted in Exodus 12, so I just alluded to a little bit with like the leaven. So there was like a whole list of things that they had to do to prepare their houses and prepare themselves for the Passover. So they had to like clean out their house entirely, get all the leaven out. It was going to take time to prepare. Are we told to do the same thing before we partake of the Lord's Supper? Is there emphasis put on where our hearts and our minds are supposed to be? We're supposed to be prepared to partake of it. We're not supposed to just show up. They weren't just going to show up on the last day of Passover, and they didn't have a lamb. They hadn't swept out their house. It wasn't something they could just show up. They had to prepare, take time to prepare. So like Peggy said, there's the Passover lamb. That's what Jesus is, right? So he's the type and antitype of the Passover lamb. So he's the perfect lamb. We've seen that he's the Messiah. We've been talking about seeing the gospel in him. That's how we're saved, is through Jesus, through his sacrifice, being the perfect lamb, saved through his blood, just like the people were saved by the blood of the Passover lamb, right? Let's see. Any other items that anybody saw? So then, like I said, the people would have known. The Jews would have been very familiar with the Passover, right? And so when Jesus is using these elements, obviously he's perfect in his knowledge, but that would have been an easy translation for them. This is a memorial, like Robbie said, that you're used to, but now this is going to mean something different. This unleavened bread, this wine is going to remind you of the sacrifice that Jesus is going to make, remind you of that blood, just like what they've been doing on the Passover. So, anything else on the The Passover, the institution of the Lord's Supper? All right, so the next question, so in verse 36, how does Jesus' prayer reflect his humanity and his divinity? How does it teach us to pray? And how does Jesus tell the disciples to combat temptation in the garden? So in starting in verse 33, it says, "And he took with him Peter and James and John and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, 'My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch.' And going a little farther, he fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, that hour might pass from him. And he said, 'Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will.'" So what do we see in, what is his prayer and kind of leading up to the prayer show us about both his humanity and his divinity?
It starts with Abba, which is a very familiar term for father, and that's what they used, you know. So he was talking to his father as a human, and then of course also spiritually.
Okay, yep,
So that's how he started it.
yep,
And then he asks for, please don't make me do this.
okay, yeah,
Very human.
If there's any way.
yeah. And did he already know the answer to that?
He knew the answer.
Yeah. Okay. What else do we see in say his humanity? What are the things that what are some of the key words that we see in how Jesus is described?
It says he's distressed and troubled.
Yeah. Are we ever distressed and troubled? Does that sound relatable? Obviously, we're not going through what he's going through, but are those human emotions that we see, or those human stresses, or those things that we do? Yeah. So Jesus experienced those things. His physical body was going through something that was no different than any of us if we were going through a stressful situation, or if we were worried about something, that he had those same physical reactions. He says himself that his soul is very sorrowful. So is our soul ever sorrowful? Do we ever felt that anxiety, or made ourselves, or something made us feel sorrowful about something? Obviously, he knew this is where it kind of mixes in his divinity. Did he know what was going to happen? What he was about to go through? He did, which would be, I would say, a lot of times, like, don't tell me what I'm going to go through. Like, it's just best to just not know, right? That it's because that's when anxiety, distress, like if you know something's happening ahead of you, that's when you get stressed out, right? Some people get stressed out if they don't know too, but a lot of times if you know, like I don't like going to the doctor, well, like a few days before that, like I'm anxious, right? Because I know I'm going to the doctor, and so it would be the same thing, and so that would be the hard thing for Jesus, knowing what he's about to go through. And we don't know exactly if he knew all of the details. We don't know how that exactly works or worked for Jesus, but he definitely knew what the end was, and he knew the crucifixion process isn't easy for anybody. That that's not an easy path, regardless of knowing the specific details of what they were going to do to him. And so, but also to David's point. He can see the big picture because of his divinity, right? And so there are times where we know things that are going to happen in our lives, where we can see maybe the benefit of those things, and that helps us get through. And so obviously Jesus could see the big picture, ultimately that this is what it would take to provide the salvation, right? That he had to die, he would raise to show his power over death, but he knew the benefit in that. So, what about how it relates to us? Or we've already talked about a couple of those things. So, but how does it teach us to pray? Sorry for the typo.
One of the things is that what we are doing when we're praying at times is we're asking God for the thing that we think would be best, but we also have to be willing to admit that his will is the thing that's going to be done.
Yeah.
And so we need to be willing to submit ourselves to that, whatever it may mean.
Yep, that's right. And when we're feeling those things, it's okay to ask, right? That it's even Jesus asked for those things he says asking if these things could be removed, and that all things are possible, but also that God's will be done. So we can always ask for those things if we're feeling distressed or we're feeling troubled, sorrowful, praying to God, asking for those things to be removed, but also knowing, like Josh said, it's ultimately God's will that we may have to suffer through some things.
Well, and also just the whole fact of praying lets you know you're not alone.
Yeah.
Because you're not just praying to the air.
Yep.
You're praying to God, and you know He's there.
Yeah. Yeah, so even when we feel physically alone, which translates into the last question, was he physically alone? More so than maybe he thought he was going to be?
Yeah.
Because he took his 3 closest friends with him? Amanda? Yeah, because in what not that there's anything wrong with seeking comfort in our friends on this earth or our family, that sort of thing, but ultimately, what did they do for Jesus? Yeah, they kind of let him down, and that can make it worse. So not to say that that's not something that we should pursue, but ultimately, like Amanda said, that the goal should be relying on God in those times, and hopefully we can be there to support one another, but knowing we're all human, we don't always help people as we should, or maybe as we can, and so in verse 37, so he takes Peter, James, and John with him, tells them he's going to go ahead and pray, so they just wait for him, and he came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. So it tells them that they should watch and pray. That's the way that they could resist temptation. And what was the temptation that they were resisting?
To deny him.
Yeah, to abandon Jesus. Not supporting Jesus in his time of need. Like Josh said, they've been with Jesus for 3 years. I mean, they're close. These are the 3 that have seen the most from the accounts that we have seen. These are the ones that Jesus should have been able to rely on to at least, I mean, we're told they couldn't even watch for 1 hour. They're still not getting it, right? If they had known what everything was going to happen, it's just hard to imagine that they would have been sleeping, that they would have been in prayer, kind of focused on that.
It doesn't say this, but you have to imagine they're wondering, what's he talking about? What temptation am I trying to?
Yeah.
You're just praying and we're just hanging out here with you. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I imagine they had to be questioning some of that in their own minds.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and so we kind of this question. So we're going to kind of go backwards into the next question. But we see he had already told them that they were going to deny him, and then they go and a short time later, then he's telling them, you should have been praying so you didn't fall into this temptation, and ultimately we see that's what happens. They end up abandoning Jesus, but not being there for him in his time of need. All right, so going into question 5, which is, like I said, it kind of goes back after we've seen that. In verses 29 and 31, Peter says that you will not fall away or deny Jesus. Do you think he truly believed that? So we'll read that in 29 through 31. It says, Peter said to him, so Jesus said that the sheep will be scattered, so the shepherd will be struck, and the sheep will be scattered. So in verse 29, Peter said to him, even though they all fall away, I will not. And Jesus said to him, truly, I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But he said emphatically, "If I must die with you, I will not deny you." And they all said the same. So do you think Peter, in that statement, do you think he truly believed that? Yeah.
Yeah, Peter's think first, or think last, act first. He jumps right into the middle of everything.
Yeah.
And, yeah, he would probably, they were probably just tired, maybe full from the meal, they walk out there and fall asleep. You know, they did not know what was coming. They just didn't get it.
Yeah.
And so, when Jesus is confronted, oh yeah, he jumps up and tries to cut the guy's ear off, cut his head off.
Yep.
Then follows behind and denies him 3 times.
Yeah. So I would say based on what Peter's understanding is, that I totally agree. I think he totally believed that he wouldn't fall away. But I think that's also did he have trust in Jesus? Did he have faith in Jesus?
He definitely did. And I think we've all been in that situation where we pray not to be tempted certain ways, but when you're in that situation, it's a lot harder to say no sometimes.
Yep.
Or not do those things. So, I mean, he definitely, I feel like, was determined not to.
Yeah. Josh?
Well, and from the beginning, he's been telling them that these things are going to happen. And they've witnessed with their own eyes people coming at him and just slipping away.
Yep.
Or being able to get out of it. So I don't think in their mind they really thought it was going to happen.
Yep.
So it's easy to say, I won't do that, when you really in the back of your mind think, it's not going to happen. It could have happened multiple times already, and you've evaded it.
Yep. Yeah, so who did Peter think that Jesus was? Who do we think he thought he was? The Messiah, right? And what was his understanding of the Messiah?
Pretty much invisible kingdom.
Yeah. And is there, to Josh's point, over those last 3 years, is there any and I believe that he thought he was the Son of God, too. That what had he seen Jesus do over these 3 years? Yeah. Totally unimaginable things for us, from controlling nature to healing people to just slipping away, like we don't even know what that means, what did that even look like, that type of thing. So why would it have even been in Peter's head at this point that they would have defeated Jesus? That this is the guy that can calm the waves, heal people. Like, he knew the Jewish leaders, they had no chance against him, right? Because he was thinking, this is the Messiah, this is for sure, this is the physical kingdom. These people, they don't stand a chance, right? So he had seen Jesus do these amazing things, but also missed the point, right? The point was Jesus was going to give himself up willingly, which we see. That's the point. So despite even given the opportunity, like David alluded to, of Peter pulling out his sword and ready to go, ready to fight, like this is the moment, that even Jesus at that point is, no, this isn't the moment. This isn't what the plan is. This isn't what's happening. And so ultimately, so why do we think they all ended up fleeing in verse 50? So they come to the garden. They've got sort of a mob gathered together to take in Jesus. And so why do we think at the end? Because it says that they all said the same thing, right? They all said, Peter's exact words, but it says they all said they wouldn't deny him. So why do we think they all ended up fleeing in verse 50?
That makes me think of a Mike Tyson quote, because everyone's got a plan until they get hit in the mouth.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of one of those situations. They all think they know what they're capable of, but then it happens, and it happens so quick that their natural reaction in the moment is not thinking all the things that they said they were.
Yeah.
They just run.
Yep. Yeah, so they were, like I said, it came time for the moment, right? This is here. They're coming to arrest Jesus. This is the moment. This is when he finally turns the tables and defeats the leadership, and he gives himself up willingly, tells Peter to put his sword away. This isn't the plan. That's not the plan. And so, they had to have been, probably felt like they got punched in the face. They didn't see this coming. What do we do now? And then there's this mob. We don't want to be arrested. Let's flee. And so I think just skipping to 7, it ties into this ultimately with the keeping talking about Peter for the time we have left. So what leads to Peter's denial of Jesus. So and what's changed in his courage in that. So sort of the same things we've been talking about. Did anybody? What's different about? So the garden happens. They scattered. Peter came back in to kind of go through, follow Jesus at a distance as he goes to the high priest.
It's not physically next to him now.
Yeah. Right.
Jesus is captured and
Yeah.
he doesn't have that.
Yeah. And so to Kendra's point, who else isn't there too? He doesn't have the rest of the disciples too, right? There's courage in numbers of that too, right? That had it been when they were sitting there in the upper room with Jesus there, with the disciples, we got this, we're all together, and then what happens? I mean, that's a natural human thing. Well, now the leader's gone, everybody's gone. That's hard, right?
Well, when Peter made that statement, I think he thought he was going to be shoulder to shoulder with Jesus.
Yep. Right.
Because that's what he did, right?
Yep.
He went his shoulder. And so when Jesus gave himself up willingly, that kind of turned his mind's eye on what he thought it was going to be upside down. He's like, I don't even know what to do.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Marisa, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, when he pulled the sword, it was very reactionary, and then once the dust kind of settled, it was like, okay, no, like, I don't know, like he was more calm, I guess, and able to not have as much of a courageous reaction.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so and that's I mean, in the moment, in the moment of temptation or things like that, is that easier? Are there things that are going to be easier to do when you're in a group? Yeah. Are there things that are going to be easier to resist when we're close to Jesus? Yeah. Is it harder? Have we found that in our lives? If we're further away from Jesus, is it harder to own Jesus? To tell people that yes, we belong to Jesus, or to resist temptations? Yeah. And so ultimately, he was alone, but then also thinking back to somebody else who was starting a little bit before to start weighing options. Who else weighed options just a little bit before this to pick sides? Judas, right? So before all this happened, he had already weighed out, this is the side that I'm going to get onto. But Peter was faced with that as well, and at that point, Jesus had already been arrested, and so he's sitting in the courtyard with a bunch of people that were not happy with who Jesus was and what was going on, and he was there saying, "You're one of his disciples," and he had to make that decision on the spot, which he wasn't. Maybe he should have been prepared to do, but he definitely wasn't prepared to be in that situation, and ultimately, the prophecy that Jesus told him came true, that he denied Jesus, but no longer being in the presence of Jesus seems to be the big thing, right, for how Peter reacted. So the question we skipped was how the chief priests. So ultimately, they were trying to convict Jesus. So they ultimately were able to get him to confess that he was the Son of God. So basically, they got him on a blasphemy charge. And so we read in Leviticus, so that's punishable by death. And so according to the Jewish law, so ultimately next week, getting into what that means going through for Jesus going through the Roman process. So they had convicted him through the Jewish process, but they couldn't actually kill people, and so or put people to death. And so going through that, so. We'll be out of town next week, so Josh is going to teach Mark 15 next week, so if you can read through there. So again, this week, thinking about the lesson, so do we betray Jesus for small physical gains in our lives? And then, even though Jesus was also God and human, he went to God when he was feeling those human emotions that we feel about stresses and temptations, that ultimately we're told in this that we need to be praying to God, trying to get closer to God. And then it's hard to own Jesus, resist temptations when we're alone, but especially when we're far away from Jesus. So keep those things in mind. Thanks for all the comments and discussion.